Hey, hello everyone. Hello LinkedIn and YouTube communities. I'm Becky Carlzon. And just in case you don't know who I am, even though this is on my social media, I run two learning communities. One is called Learning Pioneers and the other is called Press Play. And my co-creator, co-pilot in Press Play is here with us today. So I'm here with my friend and co-community designer, Kim Scott. So I'm going to hand over to you, Kim, just to say hi.
Hi, everyone. Oh, so nice to be with you, Becky. I mean, we do this a lot, but we just do it in private, don't we? So it's quite funny streaming it live. So I'm Kim Scott. I'm an early childhood consultant, really, but I also call myself a play consultant because more and more in recent years, I've been asked to help schools look at how they might take play beyond the early years and into Key Stage 1 and even sometimes into Key Stage 2.
Ah, lovely. Thanks, Kim. Kim, we should say a little bit about how we met as well. And just to give everyone a context, we're going to be talking about play today. The title of this is The Power of Play. And what we're wanting to do is kind of gift some conversation ideas around why play is important, first and foremost. And then thinking about if you believe that play is really important in all year groups, some ideas that you can go and take away and try in your classrooms and schools. In the kind of 5 years that Press Play's been running, we've kind of gathered quite a lot of insight around that. And if you are here live with us, we do invite you to join in the chat, and any questions you have, that will drive the conversation. So do be part of it if you're joining in. I think on LinkedIn, you're able to comment. I'm not sure if we get the comments on YouTube or not, but if you're on YouTube, try and then we'll know. But yeah, Kim, should we say a bit about how we met?
Well, yes, because I came over to Bangkok where you were working and was in the school that you were working in, but I missed you. You'd already gone when I got there. So that was not, in fact, how we met. You can tell the story of how we did meet.
So it was during COVID, and it was during that, we were looking at how to take content online. So we were kind of sharing conversations around that. And then I was seeing in COVID, whilst we were learning online, a real opportunity to work with kind of lead consultants, whilst we were all figuring it out, to think about how to embed play and all great educational ideas like inquiry, like learning to learn in classrooms with consultants, and to use that time to learn really powerfully. And it kind of then gave me the idea of what would it look like to really support schools with play throughout primary. So we started talking about that alongside your gin shed that you were building at the time.
I was banished out to the garden to create online content, yes.
And then, it just started from there. So we launched Press Play having never met one another.
In fact, we didn't meet each other for a couple of years, I don't think. And then it turns out that as I moved post-COVID and you came back from where you were working overseas, we're only an hour away from each other now.
Yeah. So now we get to go wild garlic picking and other delightful, wholesome things.
We still don't get together in person as much as we'd like, but a lot more than we did. And it's brilliant, isn't it? I just love having you in my life. And the work that we've done with Press Play together has just lifted the lid off stuff that I was already dabbling with. And it's been incredible, hasn't it?
And then that joint journey of me learning from you and the reading and the experience you have, you learning the kind of angles of the people that I've been working with. And then that just comes together really beautifully in Press Play, I think. So yes, that's a bit of background. But Kim, should we start with why play? As if we should even have to make a case for this, but shall we make a case for play, not just in early years? Because I think part of my passion as well for setting up Press Play with you was partly in England seeing play not be valued as highly as it could be in early years. But, our belief and understanding of play going beyond throughout primary and into secondary as well. So what are your whys behind play?
Well, I mean, if we start with early years, it's an absolute no-brainer. And I think it's absolutely bonkers that in England in particular, we are still having to battle to keep it in our reception classes. Our reception classes have 4 and 5-year-olds. And whilst we have the EYFS, which has kind of long been known as a pretty solid document, it's kind of being watered down and more external pressures are being put in. So right now, a lot of my work when I'm in England is about kind of battling to keep play in reception. Now, that isn't because the teachers don't want to keep it in. It's because a lot of external forces. But it's so clear that play now more than ever is needed, not just with our youngest children, but right the way through. We know a bit of negativity coming here, but we know that the world is not in a great place at the moment. And we know that's not just down to COVID, but we know that COVID was a global trauma and it impacted on us all in ways that I think we're only still discovering. We know that babies born during COVID had a significant impact on their development because they weren't doing the things that babies would normally have done. If you think about going to a supermarket and the interactions that a baby gains from being in the supermarket, even when its parents aren't noticing, the learning, the observing, babies were actually learning to point at things, which is a significant milestone, a precursor to language, that nonverbal communication. They were learning to do that months later, it turns out, babies during COVID, because they weren't having the experiences. Now, fast forward to now, those children are in our schools. We're kind of still surprising people by saying children are still coming in, with earlier stages of development and so on. It's so obvious that those play experiences that we wish they might have had beforehand are needed more than ever. We also know, I'm not going to hark on about it, but we're finding more and more out from research now about the damage that excessive time on screens is doing to our children, especially when that time is perhaps not shared with an adult interacting with them. We've obviously got all the pressure coming around from children, older children being on social media and so on. Perhaps parents working harder than ever. All these reasons why maybe some of the things children might have been doing in their home lives some years ago are not happening as much. There was a Times article not that long ago referring to research finding that children are playing a lot less at home than ever before. And you ask any teacher, and actually this is the worldwide. I mean, I don't go all around the world, but I do work in a lot of different countries, and everyone's telling me the same. Children are not playing in the same way at home. So actually then, it becomes the point when school used to add some extra play and it was a great vehicle for learning. And so, yes, it would support children's social and emotional learning, but you could learn a lot of other things through play. Right now, school might be the only place where children are playing. So if we don't have it in school, where are children getting the opportunity to play? And then, sorry, I will pause for breath in a minute. And then we've got to think about what play gives us. Yes, it gives us, all mammals play, and they play to practice skills that they're going to need for later in life, like hunting and so on. But, human mammals, babies, children, we're learning our moral code in play. We're learning so much more. But also we know that the engagement that comes with play is exactly what we need in our education system. The brain needs to be engaged in order to learn. Yes, we need new knowledge. Yes, we need a chance to consolidate that knowledge, but we also need engagement, that kind of brain's reward system to be activated. And play does this naturally. So it's a case of like, play can't be an optional extra. Certainly in the early years, it absolutely fundamentally is a child's right. But if we see the benefits that play can give for learning with young children, it's not that hard to take the steps to see what are those features of play and how can we really harness them for learning for older children, not just because it helps with their cognitive learning, but because of the traits that we can develop in play. And also the social and emotional aspects, they've long, I think, been noted. But I think we see a higher level of learning when children come about it through play and in playful ways. Sorry, that's a very long answer.
Don't be sorry. All of that was spot on and gold. I'll just build on it a little bit. Yeah, kind of what you were saying about engagement, and play is a space where we can discover who we are, what we love. Is a place where we can challenge ourselves in a psychologically and emotionally safe environment, because it's a place where we can iterate and make mistakes, and that's just all part of it. It's like there's no shame and there's no kind of outcome. And you were linking there a little bit with the learner attributes that we develop through play. And, that's kind of one of my big kind of passion areas in education. But I often think, play and learning power, or learning to learn, play is the best incubator for all of those learning habits to develop very powerfully and in a full orchestra. So whenever we are playing, whenever children are playing, they are developing a whole suite of learner attributes at once. It's never just one or two, and in most learning it never is anyway. But play, that happens so naturally. And I'm just going to link in something Guy Claxton, my co-author of my first book, says, and I think this is really powerful, because he talks about exploration being very important in any kind of learning. Not just being told, having a chance to discover and figure out for yourself and make the links for yourself. But there's a quote, let's see if I can remember it, because I thought it was so good. He said, if we preempt exploration with explanation too much of the time, then there are costs to that. And I love that, because it holds us accountable. So where he's kind of saying, we've got a video clip of him talking about this, that if we he kind of says the challenge, one of the challenges with play, or a pushback with play, might be, but we need to get through content, and what about covering all of the curriculum outcomes? And I'll ask you about that in a second. Like, it's a good piece of pushback, because it's true, we're asked to cover curriculum, to tick off boxes. But where Guy says, when we're not giving that chance for exploration, just be aware of what the costs are. And Yong Zhao, just linking him in as well, he's written a book called, I think it's called The Side Effects of Education. Oh no, What Works May Hurt. And he talks about the side effects of education. So where we are not allowing play, where we are not prioritizing children's most natural form of learning, we are cutting off a part of themselves, and we are cutting off a skill that they could carry on through the whole of their lives and use to be creative thinkers, creative problem solvers, creative designers. So I think there's a personal responsibility for us as educators to teach in the way and to create learning in the way that is best going to support our children mentally, emotionally, for their own learning habits and independence, and for the curriculum and the content, and for discovering their passions. And
for mental health, I mean, that was what I started that very long rant with earlier. Mental health, our children, our learners need play for all of those reasons. Play, experiential learning, whatever you want to call it. I own the word play. There are people that say we shouldn't even use play in the early years because people don't understand it. Well, I'm not going to throw it away. I'm going to keep going until people do understand it, because it's not a dirty word. But the mental health, I think, of our future rests on children being engaged by their learning, first and foremost, but also children having those opportunities to play, to be playful. I mean, absolutely fundamental. And that's very first and foremost on my mind, really, because that's the basics. We've got to get well-being okay, because learning rests on that foundation of good well-being. We can't access our higher brain in order to take on new learning if we don't have a fundamental well-being. And we see well-being when we see children playing. You really do, don't you?
Yeah. And, it's those, I'm glad you kind of brought that up, because I just think it's those fundamental basics anywhere in education, in any way that we are teaching and learning, our own and the children's well-being and mental health. And off the basis of that, the relational practice and the relationships And from there, we can build psychologically, emotionally safe spaces. And from that place, we can launch into powerful learning. And without that as the baseline, how do I say it without swearing? We're not going to get very far.
Don't ask me.
I'm totally good with swearing. It's fine. But just to think of another way of saying things. But yeah, we're not going to get very far where we haven't got that sense of self, sense of worth, and then the connection with other members in our classroom. And again, play creates the opportunity for that. It's great to see Sadia here. Hi, Sadia. Commenting in the comments. Yeah, not prioritizing the most natural way of learning. It's coming back to that.
Yes.
And I find it so interesting that I was listening to another video of Guy that we've just put out on Learning Pioneers, and he said he's having a bit of a rant. We're talking about curiosity, and Guy says school is not only very strange, but it's very stupid. It's like, and it is. We have created systems that sap out every single thing that is conducive to powerful learning and loving coming to school. It's like, how did we do that? You know, did that happen?
It became about delivery, and that's where somehow a curriculum has become about being delivered. And I don't know if it was Howard Gardner who said delivery is the enemy of deep learning, or I might have adapted that quote, but this idea that, and I think it links back to what you said, that Guy said, that we're so desperate for children to get this knowledge we want to give them, especially if you're operating within national curriculum, very knowledge-based curriculum. But I know not everybody is. But even so, there's a lot that we want children to know, and we want them to know it so desperately, and that we feel that if we tell them enough in as many ways, it will just somehow go in. And, you know, wouldn't that be convenient? But children, no learners are really like that. They need the time to wallow, to make mistakes, and to try things out. And the ironic thing is, a lot of the things that we really want children to be good at, things like concentrating, all the executive functioning skills, really, right? Which we now know, if you want to be good at writing when you're older, you don't need to be really, really good at writing when you're 4. You need to be kind of developing your executive functioning skills well. The research shows that. And, you know, executive functioning, being able to switch between tasks, that cognitive flexibility, holding information in mind, that focus, avoiding distractions. You see a child engaged in play, whatever age, or an adult engaged in whatever their kind of play is. Because I play a lot with ideas. You know, when I'm putting together a presentation or a new speech, I'm like, ooh, what film could I use as the basis for this? And, you know, and when I get into that, when a child has the time to kind of get beyond the initial exploration of play, which is why we need to come back to time, and then into that deeper level, that's when you see the most amazing concentration. You see a child that can't hear you. You see that deep, deep focus. It's flow, isn't it? Csikszentmihalyi. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but, you know, flow, which actually, he doesn't write about flow necessarily in terms of education. He writes about it in terms of happiness, doesn't he? Which brings us back to the importance of play for well-being. But that is flow. You know, Ferrilava's developed the Loven scale to measure levels of involvement. It's really come from that work on flow. And you see all the concentration we wish a child could have at that time. And yet so often we don't value that. And we interrupt them to bring them back to something we would like them to know. We're interrupting them developing the very thing that we most want them to develop, which is concentration and attention. And that's transferable then to other things. So I think it's so often thinking we want to get this across to a child. We want to get this knowledge across, and that us telling you or showing you is kind of the only way. And we miss out on so much, because when children get themselves interested in something, they will go to the ends of the earth to learn about it. We just have to kind of set up the conditions for that, don't we?
And So building on that, first of all, I want to pick up on Catherine's comment. Hi, Catherine, who's written about play literacy, which I think doesn't Susan Axelson talk about play literacy. I think that's where that's where I first heard it. So I just wanted to credit that, which I just think is a lovely idea and phrase, to become play literate. But I was then thinking, let's say everyone listening values play, or let's say we're in a school that values play. And we know, and the reason we set up Press Play and work with so many incredible speakers was looking at, okay, we believe in play. We have a lot of outside agency that's not necessarily conducive to play. And we have members of our staff team that maybe don't fully understand play yet. So how do we get started? And how can we start to make play feel friendlier and support team members to start to tinker with and develop their play practice? So I don't know whether to go down the route of what the challenges are, because there's a very long list, or go down the route of then how can we start to support staff? I'm actually just thinking, answering my own question a little bit, but just like lifting up playfulness of adults. Because I was just speaking to someone this morning and saying it's so interesting in Press Play, with like 20 different speakers and foci in play, that the schools we're working with at the moment, nearly every single one has picked as a priority to look at playful adults, which was what we looked at with inventor Dominic Wilcox, which was amazing. But, of course, it's got to start with us. It's got to start with how playful are we? How much are we embodying play? How play literate are we? Where is that in the staff room? Where is that in our own practice and our own tinkering? Where is that in our team meetings? We can't really get anywhere without loosening that up first.
No, it's kind of defining it too, because that was something we did a lot at the beginning of Press Play, wasn't it? With people like Judy Fisher. What actually is play? And you'll know my favorite quote when we did a Q&A with Pazzy Solberg, and he said, it's a bit like love, it's really hard to define, but when you see it, you know it. So I think thinking about your own experiences of play, which is what one of our schools who are in Press Play at the moment, Headland School, they did some sort of play questionnaires. I thought that was brilliant, to think about what are your own experiences of play when you were younger, what was it like, and to really, they've gone really slow at really starting with the adults. And I think that was quite new to me, because I tend to fly into things. Let's get this going. But if you really start to get people reflecting and connecting and remembering the joy that they have experienced in play, and then thinking about what they gained from that, it's not that big a step then to start getting that commitment to, I want that for my learners, whatever age I'm working with.
Yeah, totally. I'm just going to credit Headland's work. I happen to have Linda Kayser and Judy Halbert's book here, who we're working with in Learning Pioneers at the moment, but they use Linda and Judy's spiral of inquiry, and the entire system, the way it's set up, is set up to really slow down and really listen and gather information and data, like from the students, and starting with belonging, so that's where they've got that slow approach from. So what else was I going to say in terms of, so when we started Press Play and we were looking at this grapple with how do we bring teams along with us, and especially in upper primary, where there was this kind of fear around play, and I understand, it's letting go. It's like, am I going to waste my time? How am I going to measure this? So I think even getting those fears lifted up is really useful. Get those kind of voiced. But when we looked at the connections between inquiry learning and play with Kath Murdoch, that was the time that play really clicked for those kind of upper primary and secondary teachers. They started to understand that they could be more playful and they could loosen up their day. There was a really lovely point that Kath made around playing with the structure of your day, and she was suggesting, like with inquiry, that you would start by re-engaging with your inquiry, But when I was teaching in year 1, year 2, so up to kind of 8-year-olds, we started every day with play. You know, it wasn't that hard to make sure that happened. And what that really helped children do was settle, lock onto something they were really passionate about. It meant that I had a really nice starting point with them when we started our morning circle, because we could review and we could pick up how they were developing their learning over time. We could link it into the rest of the day's learning, you know. So I think, and there's a lot of research and movement around nervous system aware education now as well. And, you know, that comes into play too. How regulated can you get in a playful situation? It was actually like when I worked with year 2 children, there was one boy in my class who found it really challenging once he had dysregulated to calm back down again. And it was through play that he would get back to that space, you know. So,
wouldn't that be wouldn't that be a great world to be moving into? And I do know schools that are starting to do this, perhaps more special schools where, you know, if children are sitting listening in an adult directed situation, that they could have the agency to go, oh, I need to go and have a little bit of movement, need to have a little bit of play. There's a school I know not far from where I am here where they have a little trampoline and actually children can go and have a bounce. It's all to do with interoception and actually tuning in to your signals, but having the agency where you could make that choice and be trusted that you'll do that and then you'll come back. I mean, why does that feel so completely alien? Because everyone's worried about losing control. And I think when we were working with those people who were in upper primary and they were new to it, there was a feeling of, this is going to go crazy. I'm going to lose control. You know, I'm taking a leap of faith. And so for those people, it's so important, because that's understandable, that you work with something that's within your comfort zone, but stretching it a little bit. You know, like the old David Bowie quote, wasn't it? You've got to be just out of your depth in the water, but not drowning. So enabling people to do something where they don't feel completely out of control, because to them, you know, if you've worked in Key Stage 2 all your career, you pop down to the nursery and see play, and they often can't wait to get out of there. So that was where looking at playful learning and inquiry. I mean, we also learned, didn't we, that you can have inquiry-based schools that never play, and that play is a part of inquiry, but it doesn't always come within it. And I think Kath really talked about that and the difference between play and inquiry, and how you could have inquiry without play. But bringing that in, and I think it's the International School of Billund, the Lego school, they have added play, I think, in their learner profiles, if I'm using the right language. It's a core part. But for us, it was, I think, for a lot of people, seeing that you could be playful and the adult didn't have to lose all control. And that a lot of that was about the adult being playful in their thinking and thinking, what's going to engage children in this? You know, what's going to make this matter? Because the whole point of this, it is about all the things we've talked about, well-being, mental health, but it's also about making learning more memorable, because learning is just repetition, isn't it? And we want children to remember the things that we want them to learn. And if you make it memorable, if you make it connect with them in some way emotionally, or that it's been an enjoyable experience, we know that it's more likely to stay. In fact, I'll never forget a conversation I had with a neuroscientist while I happened to be looking at penguins on an island in the middle of the Falklands, an uninhabited island. And I happened to be there with a neuroscientist, and he was talking to me about memory and learning. So I will never forget that. He talked about how studies are showing that the myelin coating, you know, that really shows learning is really embedded, is thicker when learners have learned something in experiential ways rather than being told. I mean, that's amazing.
Wow.
Argue with that, because when something's coated in, that's really embedded in your long-term memory. Why would we not, Becky?
Yes.
Why would we not do this? You know, this isn't just about fun and happiness. It's about great learning too.
Yeah. And the level of creativity and divergent thinking that comes through play. So you're kind of talking as well about like embedding those kind of curriculum targets, and they get all the more embedded through experiential learning when we care about what we're doing. And I'm just thinking back to my own practice and experience and the play-based and playful settings I've worked in, and a lot of the places I taught in, I was either in early years or in year 1 or year 2, but I still managed to keep year 2 very play-based. You just have to be creative with it, but and you have to have a school leadership team that will support you with it, which I did. But in some of the early years settings I worked here in Bristol, like the things the kids invented and made, and were so meaningful. So obviously part of early years learning in the environment is phonics and learning letter sounds. And one of the kids in my class invented, this should be made, I tried to get it made, a phonetic keyboard that had digraphs and trigraphs on it. Wow. So, because of course, to a 4-year-old, a keyboard's useless. It's capital letters and it's a mess, And even if you get lowercase, it's still really hard. And it's not in alphabetical order like they might be used to, or in the kind of sat pin or whatever phonetic order. So he invented a digraph and trigraph keyboard. And I was like, you are a genius. This is such a good idea. Why does this not exist? So, those kinds of things, when I think as well about meaningful approaches to learning.
Yeah.
I mentioned inquiry, and also like project-based learning, which would be a kind of sub branch of inquiry learning. Like when I've been to project-based schools, I just think, why are we doing anything else? Because of the purpose behind, the learning. It has that outcome beyond the children's selves, and they learn that they can have positive impact on the world around them. And some of those projects, so I visited a school in Cambodia, like a leadership academy, and they're having impact on their whole country. Like, what agency? And I just really think project-based learning, inquiry combined with play, and intentionally having play embedded into that process, where it's just like, we're just going to tinker. Let's just play for a bit. Let's just see what comes up. That how powerful that would be. If there are any schools that develop project-based learning with play, please get in touch. I'd love to come and visit you.
Well, because it's just you're applying constantly what you know, and as you're applying it, it's being embedded, or you're finding out that this bit didn't work or this didn't work. And I can't think of anything we've got. I mean, I'm looking around my office that's been created, whether it's things or systems where someone won't have played with ideas. I always go, Einstein and his theory of relativity, he didn't just sit down in 20 minutes, created it. There have been a lot of playing, and yet we seem not to allow that as children get older. It's just, this is what you need to know, and we want you to remember it so we can test it.
And I think we should sort, because we're going to be online for about 12 more minutes. Okay. So we should talk about maybe some more ins, because I think those kind of what we were talking about before in terms of, and write in the chat if you've got any questions, because we'll pivot if there's anything that anyone's like, please talk about this. But that kind of working with adult mindset and taking the fear out of play, that can be a really useful strategy people can take away. And I'm thinking about the speakers and content and the people we've worked with in Press Play, and the different ways in which we suggested to schools they could lock on to play. So I'm even thinking about Helen Williams's work with playful maths, and how even just looking at that, like a strand of the curriculum, maths or English or science is so easy to play with, so you can kind of become more playful, embed more play, have more exploratory learning by just looking at a subject. That would be a safe start point. Yeah. So what other ways would you?
Well, I think, because I'm doing a conference in Bangkok soon with Johnny Allams, who also did playful literacy with us, and we have great fun planning it. And just looking at, so I'll just hold on to that thing that you said, looking at a subject, looking at how we teach it and going, how can I make this something that children are going to love? And first of all, we just start, Johnny and I in our training, we'll get people making an A to Z of what children love. Anything, finding things, being silly, being in a group, doing things for themselves, things that are novel or new, things that they're familiar with. And that becomes almost like a planning document for more of the adult-led stuff. So playful learning, just that we clarify, our interpretation of that is stuff that the adult plans, but is enjoyable, engaging, playful. Whereas play is when it's coming directly from the child. So looking at an alternative to what we described, where you're looking to make things more playful, I've worked with year 2 classes that have just given children time to play. Now they, for that, will have developed some continuous provision. So this is another way that a lot of people start in different places. I personally say start with you and your thinking and more playful adult-led learning and see where that goes. But actually, the school I'm thinking of, children having a long period of time, and it was an hour and a half, 2 hours, a few times a week, in an environment that it wasn't hugely expensive, lots of loose parts, large and small, and they saw what the children did with them. I was thinking, oh gosh, that's a long time for free play. I love it, but am I going to be able to help them, sell this to their leadership team? Well, this was interesting. And of course, I should have known this. The longer, this was year 2, the longer they had in the play, the better their play got, because they got beyond that kind of exploratory level into that deeper level. This was in Thailand, in a school. They were making a sushi restaurant. By the end of the 2 hours, they'd moved from kind of children over here at a table making their own things and these children building the sushi restaurant to incorporating the children at the table who were making the food. And this is when, of course, the power of adults being present, because the one thing I must say is that both the teacher and the teaching assistant committed to this time in play. It wasn't when the teacher caught up on something else. And they didn't go into this play, no planned curriculum objectives. You can't really plan for objectives in play, not strictly speaking. Otherwise, you'll end up, it won't truly be the child's play. But they weren't even setting up with objectives in mind. And this was fascinating. The children were coming up with their own ideas, and the adult's job, as always in play, was to connect, pay attention to what the children were paying attention to, particularly to their thinking, trying to fathom and talk through their thinking with them. And if they're not verbal, then actually watching and observing. And that's when then the adult support can add an extra lift to the play. It's what Vygotsky called the more experienced other. Not there to direct it, but there to help make the play even better. And the adult said, I bet that they were making a conveyor belt. I bet we could make that move round. And that was all. And then that was it. The children were thinking and planning. And as always happens, just as they were starting to get somewhere, it was time to stop. And this is why we need long periods. But what we decided to do here was photograph that and then put it up on the screen back in the classroom, because they were playing in a different space. And then when it was their turn next time to go into this area, they weren't kind of starting from the exploratory phase again. They were like, oh, look at what you were doing. And actually, I know that while you've been in the classroom, you've been making menus and things like that. What are you going to do to it when you go back? What are your thoughts? Where are we going to go with this? So this meant that the kind of play continued. And this is a little bit about what Helen Williams was talking about in her live, that she'd had children playing in role play. The adult hadn't been able to get there at that point. But because there was a videoing happening and there were photographs, she was able to talk about it with them afterwards and talk through their ideas. And I think those are just some ways. But one other thing is that not everybody can have that time, right? And go into free play and try and see what was happening. I think just having pockets of time when you have got some play provision that can come into your classroom if you're working with older children, things like small world, imaginative play, loose parts. And of course, we've got wonderful Sean, who's done us a great live impress play on loose parts. see what the children are doing. They will tell you. It's like your curriculum is actually in them. If you just notice, take the time, and you don't have to be stood there writing it all down. Just notice, tune in, understand, and then your job is to see, can I add something to this play right now, or are they doing brilliantly on their own? And if I can add something, I've got to keep it with the child feeling in control. You know, the child is the expert in their play. And one of the best ways to have great conversations in play is to really remember that and say, you know, show me, tell me, how can I do this? And that will give them a real reason often to explain what they're doing. And as they're explaining, that's obviously really helping their thinking as well, isn't it?
I'm thinking a little bit about the kind of challenges and the fears that people might feel around play, and kind of what's the point still, you know, and it's just frivolous. But like I'm thinking about what we were saying at the beginning about lifting up those fears, because so often we don't actually know what those fears are. We just kind of voice, I'm not going to do that. That's not for my kids. And then, but I was thinking one of those key fears is the fear of like kind of losing control, but like not having the structure. And what you're describing there, and I guess what I was touching on, is like not completely losing the structure. You know, so say you have the continuous provision, there's structure there in the environment for children to engage with. Say you're looking at playful maths and being more playful with maths, you're just thinking about how to loosen that up. And then I was thinking about what you were sharing about loose parts too. I think that's another great way into being more playful, because you can't go wrong, really. You know, the worst thing that's going to happen is there's going to be a bit of a mess for a while, but then you iterate, you know. And so one school that we were working with last year, who were in Learning Pioneers, Cat Places School, and it was Cat who I last did a StreamYard with. They were looking at developing play across the whole of primary. And one thing they developed with their whole team is that every single classroom had like, you know, those kind of building blocks, but they're not, you know, the ones that are just those gorgeous ones that you really want in your classroom.
Community playthings,
yeah. And then obviously the invitation and the expectation was, look at how this can fit into learning and fit into your inquiries, and obviously in Wales inquiry curriculum. But when I visited, when Cat's got an open day coming up, we should have mentioned that in our StreamYard, but I've mentioned it in here. Yeah, it's in March. I'm not quite sure the date. I'll put it in the chat for this afterwards. But when I visited, they still had their focus on play. Their current focus is developing a language for learning. But when I went around and saw what had been built from the blocks in different age groups, you could see the progression of complexity. So in the year 5-6 classroom, they built the Titanic, and oh my goodness, it looked like the Titanic. It was like, whoa, look at that. Yeah. So that ever more sophisticated, not necessarily ever more sophisticated play, but how children can then manipulate whatever they're playing with to a more sophisticated level, and how that progression looks as you go through primary and then into secondary.
Yeah, and actually a school I was in yesterday in Wales as well. Wales are doing really well on this right now. They've been working, a couple of schools I've been working with in Wales. We've been looking at taking sort of Froebel's occupations through the school as a good way into kind of building play type skills. So it'll be things like sewing or cooking. And it depends whether you call them play or not, right? I suppose I include them in play, but these are things that, you know, perhaps children are taught some specific skills around them. And that can be a really good way for teachers in kind of, you know, later primary years to feel it's not a free-for-all, but it's playful and there's lots of learning that comes. I mean, there were children in the reception class yesterday using sewing machines. So we look at the progression of skills as well, because if children in reception are doing that, like you say, what could they be doing by year 6? And I think very often when something like that, like the clay comes out in year 3, it might be to build a, you know, I don't know, a Diwali pot, and then it goes away never to be seen again. So these can feel like slightly more controlled experiences. They are rooted in play, but they can have a clear progression, because I think sometimes it's fear of children not learning that comes from play. And it does take someone who really understands children and how to interact and how play works to be confident in that. Because otherwise, and I suppose this is a warning, a lot of people say, right, we've got continuous provision, now we need help to use it. And it's great that they've developed this provision. But what truly happens is the practice hasn't really changed at all. The adult still stays in the classroom doing their directed teaching with a group. Maybe a teaching assistant goes with the children, but usually not. They're doing another group, and it's kind of a way of keeping the children busy. And yes, they're having fun, but after a bit, if adults don't get involved at all in play, they're not really moving it forward, not in play for learning. And it's also giving messages about the importance. And sometimes that continuous provision is not as challenging as what children would have had when they were 3 or 4. And that's when a principal or a head teacher comes in, sees the children, age 8 or 7, playing with the train set in the same way they were in reception, and goes, we're not having this. Let's get them back on tables. So that, I'd say, I'd much rather people didn't have the full continuous provision and continued. I'd say start with something small and really get yourself into it, and start with it if you're not going to be fully committed to it, if that makes sense. Because otherwise it's an awful lot of money spent on something that looks great and gives children a break from the other learning, but it's not really being used as it could. So build it up gradually, I'd say. And I still say small world, building construction, like you were talking about, fantastic place to start, loose parts.
And all of that comes back to teacher mindset, but because of course we've all been indoctrinated into, first of all, a way of being as human beings, and secondly, our pedagogy in however way that's come to us. And that might have been constructed intentionally, and it might have just happened by happenstance, and it's just the way we've always done things. So it just comes back to that, that responsibility we have again as educators to be constantly self-reflecting. I've written a blog post called Spring Clean Your Pedagogy, which is good for spring, but constantly looking at and being truly honest about, coming back to Yong Zhao's quote about what the side effects are or could be to the way that we are teaching, or the experiences we're creating, and also what the benefits are, because no matter what we do, there could be benefits and costs. And just like you were describing with play there, without the pedagogical understanding and the understanding of the value of that free play and knowing how to kind of enable it, that can become really, for want of a better word, flaky, so, and that's not great either, so it's about us as pedagogues knowing what we're doing and being really intentional with what we're putting into place. Experimental, taking risks, but doing that in a measured, kind of intelligent way.
Yeah, because for some people, taking risks might be saying to the children, right, we're going to research, I don't know, wolves. But instead of me telling you, that you've all got to go on an iPad, you can have a choice. You can go to the library, you can go to the book corner, you can do this. Even that is a start about how we might bring agency into learning, is a great start into play. For some teachers, that might feel risky. Whereas if you've perhaps been embroiled in the early years for years and you move up an age range, you're going to be able to take things further quicker.
Makes me feel like segueing in James Nottingham's learning pit, like, how deep are we in the learning pit of play? Because to take that risk, and you could go right into the pit and go really deep and throw everything up in the air, although that's probably, not the best way. Or you could make a small change and think, okay, this is my grapple, and commit to trying to make it work with the pedagogical understanding behind it. So we're going to wrap things up, Kim, because we said we go for 45 minutes and it's 50, and we could just keep talking.
I know.
We're here till midnight.
Yes.
Get the gin on.
Absolutely. I need one.
Oh, Kim, it's been a delight speaking with you. Thank you, everyone, for joining in. Thank you, everyone, for coming and commenting. And I'm just going to leave an open question. I'm not quite sure what it is yet, but something along the lines of, you know, what's your challenge in play? So if you've listened back to this and you feel motivated by play and you're wanting to develop more play in your school, we'd love to hear what your challenge is, because we might have some resources we can share with you. It might inspire inspiration in us to think about what we could put together. And we love problem solving with people. So what's your challenge in play? Put it in the chat after you've watched this back. Okay, Kim, thank you. Have a lovely evening. And you're off to China soon.
Well, later in April, but I'm off to Cambodia and Thailand next week to work. Yes.
Lush. Well, say hello to Thailand for me.
I will. And I'm actually going to be in your old school, Patna.
Oh, are you? Say hello to Patna for me. It is a fantastic school. So, gorgeous learning environment too. Oh, awesome. Thanks, Kim.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.